Namaskar and welcome to RIG History Extended. Today we revisit one of the most defining moments in the modern history of the Indian subcontinent, the Indo-Pak War of 1971. This was not just a war, it was a struggle for human rights, for dignity, and for justice. In just 13 days, India stood by the oppressed people of East Pakistan, faced superpower threats, and emerged victorious, not for conquest but for liberation. With extraordinary leadership from Indira Gandhi, strategic brilliance from Sam Manekshaw, and the outmatched courage from our soldiers, India changed the map of the South Asia forever. Through this video, we explore every dimension: the genocide, the refugee crisis, Mukti Bahini, naval and air dominance, and the birth of Bangladesh. Stay with us as we honor the sacrifice, courage, and vision that shaped a new nation. Jai Hind. Introduction: The Historic War of 1971. The Indo-Pak War of 1971 was a 13-day military conflict that changed South Asia forever. Sparked by Pakistan's genocide in East Pakistan and India's humanitarian intervention, it led to the creation of Bangladesh. Over 93,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered, the largest since World War II, marking a decisive Indian victory. India's role was not one of conquest but liberation, standing for justice, human dignity, and regional stability. For India, it showcased military excellence, political courage, and moral leadership under Indira Gandhi and Sam Manekshaw. The war is remembered each 16th December as Vijay Divas, honoring the brave soldiers and the liberated nation of Bangladesh. It wasn't just a battle for borders, but a fight for the oppressed and a bold stand against tyranny and genocide. India Pakistan, a nation born divided. In 1947, Pakistan was created as a homeland for Muslims but emerged divided into East and West, separated by 1,600 kilometers of Indian land. West Pakistan dominated politics, military, and economy, while East Pakistan, largely Bengali, was sidelined and marginalized. Bengalis were denied equal political representation and military roles despite being the majority population. Urdu was imposed as the state language, sparking outrage in East Pakistan, where Bengali was the mother tongue. Infrastructure, jobs, and government funds disproportionately benefited West Pakistan, fueling deep resentment. Religion alone failed to unify the two wings, cultural and economic, and also linguistic divides grew sharply. The foundation of Pakistan was unstable, but on exclusion, repression, and denial of East Pakistan's rightful identity. Discrimination against East Pakistan. East Pakistan faced systematic neglect. Despite forming the majority, it received only a fraction of natural resources. The Pakistani military and civil services were dominated by Punjabis, Urdu speaking elites from the West. Education, healthcare, and development lagged behind in the east, worsening poverty and public discontent. West Pakistan's leaders viewed Bengalis as inferior, questioning their Islamic credentials and loyalty. Language became a flashpoint. Bengalis rejected Urdu imposition, demanding their linguistic rights. Even natural disasters like the 1970 Vola cyclone saw delayed and insufficient relief from the West, deepening resentment. The Bengali population began seeing themselves as culturally distinct, seeking recognition and justice within a failed union. Rise of Bengali nationalism. Bengali identity began to outshine the shared Islamic identity imposed by West Pakistan. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his Awami League became the face of East Pakistan's aspirations. The 6 point demand proposed by Mujib in 1966 called for a near complete autonomy for the East. Language, culture, and self governance became central to Bengali pride and mobilization. Civil disobedience, student activism, and mass movements swept across East Pakistan by the late 1960s. The idea of a united Pakistan became hollow for many Bengalis as the repression replaced inclusion. The movement transformed from autonomy to independence, especially after repeated betrayals from the West Pakistani rulers. 1970 elections and political crisis. In December 1970, Pakistan held its first general elections since independence, seen as a turning point. Sheikh Mujib's Awami League won a landslide, 167 out of 313 seats, enough to form the federal government. Despite the democratic mandate, West Pakistani elites led by Bhutto and General Yahya Khan refused to transfer power. The military regime stalled parliament and began plotting to crush the Awami League's movement. Instead of respecting democracy, they chose suppression, pushing the country to the brink of civil war. Millions in the East Pakistan launched a non cooperation campaign demanding Mujib to be made prime minister. The rejection of electoral results exposed the deep rooted colonial mindset of West toward the East. West Pakistan's rejection of democracy. The 1970 general elections gave Sheikh Mujibur Rahman a clear democratic mandate to lead Pakistan. His Awami League's landslide's victory shocked the West Pakistani establishment who feared losing control. Instead of accepting the results, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and General Yahya Khan conspired to deny power to Mujib. Parliamentary sessions were postponed indefinitely, triggering mass protests and a civil disobedience movement in the East Pakistan. West Pakistan's military leaders viewed democracy as a threat to their dominance and launched a brutal crackdown. On 22nd February 1971, the generals decided to crush the Bengali movement, choosing bullets over ballots. The betrayal of democracy exposed the authoritarian mindset of West Pakistan and ignited the final path to war. Operation Searchlight, the Night of Horror. On the night of 25th March 1971, the Pakistani army launched Operation Searchlight, a planned genocide of Bengalis. Dhaka University was among the first targets. Students were dragged out and shot, hostels set ablaze. In just one night, over 7,000 unarmed civilians were massacred in Dhaka alone. Lieutenant General Tikka Khan, known as the Butcher of Bengal, led the operation with ruthless efficiency. Civilians were machine gunned in the streets, houses burned, and women abducted by soldiers. The crackdown aimed to decapitate the Bengali resistance and force submission through terror. The night marked the beginning of one of the worst mass killings in post World War II history. Genocide and ethnic cleansing in East Pakistan. Operation Searchlight expanded into full blown genocide across East Pakistan in the following months. Villages were razed, civilians slaughtered, and mass graves filled with bodies of men, women, and children. Official estimates put the death toll up to 3 million Bengalis, a number Bangladesh stands by. Even the CIA admitted that over 2 lakh civilians had been killed by mid 1971. The genocide specifically targeted Hindus, students, professionals, and anyone suspected for supporting nationalism. Bodies were dumped in rivers, burned en masse, off or left in the open as warnings. Pakistan's objective was clear: silence East Pakistan's voice by erasing its people and spirit. Targeting of Hindus and intellectuals. The Pakistani army saw Bengali Hindus as enemies within a fifth column to be eliminated. Hindu homes were marked and attacked. Entire families were murdered or driven out. Religious persecution combined with ethnic hatred created a climate of terror for Hindu communities. Intellectuals, teachers, doctors, and journalists were also hunted, seen as the brain behind the resistance. On 14th December 1971, Pakistani forces abducted and executed hundreds of top Bengali intellectuals. This act, now remembered as Martyred Intellectuals Day, was meant to cripple Bangladesh's future. The systematic targeting of minds and minorities was a calculated attempt to destroy a nation's soul. Widespread rape and sexual violence. Alongside mass killings, the Pakistani army waged a campaign of rape as a weapon of war. Between 2 lakh and 4 lakh Bengali women were raped, many repeatedly, many even never survived. Rape camps were set up, where women were imprisoned and violated by soldiers over months. The aim was not just cruelty, it was ethnic cleansing, psychological warfare, and a tool of humiliation. Victims included young girls, pregnant women, and elderly mothers. There was no age or mercy. Many women were forced to give birth to children of rape or underwent forced abortions. Even Pakistani officials later admitted the scale of these atrocities, making this one of history's darkest chapters. Refugee exodus, millions pour into India. As the genocide in East Pakistan escalated, terrified civilians began fleeing across the border into India. By May 1971, nearly 1.5 million refugees had arrived. By November, the number surged to 10 million. Hindus were specifically targeted, but Muslims and other ethnic Bengalis also fled en masse to escape violence. Families crossed rivers and jungles with just the clothes on their backs, seeking safety and shelter. This was one of the largest refugee crises in human history, placing enormous strain on India. Most refugees settled in overcrowded camps in West Bengal, Assam, Tripura, and Meghalaya. Their stories of torture, rape, and massacre horrified Indian citizens and officials alike. Humanitarian crisis in Indian border states. India opened its borders to Bengali refugees out of compassion, but the situation soon overwhelmed local resources. Camps were hastily set up, often without enough food, water, sanitation, or medical care. Diseases like cholera and dysentery spread rapidly in cramped, unhygienic conditions. Local communities, already impoverished, shared what little they had with the refugees. The Indian government was spending millions of rupees daily to maintain the camps. Border states struggled to handle the sheer volume. Tripura's population doubled in a few months. Despite the burden, Indian citizens showed extraordinary empathy, standing by their Bengali brethren. Indira Gandhi's moral and political stand. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi rose as a strong and compassionate leader in the face of this crisis. She condemned the Pakistan's army's actions as genocide, demanding global attention and accountability. Gandhi declared India would not tolerate such inhumanity on its doorstep indefinitely. She assured the refugees of India's support while preparing the nation for possible war. At home, she built consensus across political parties and garnered public support for intervention. Her speeches stirred the nation, portraying India's role as that of a savior, not as an aggressor. Indira Gandhi's moral clarity gave India a unified voice, ready to stand for justice. Global awareness and diplomatic outreach. Indira Gandhi launched a global diplomatic campaign to expose the horrors in East Pakistan. She visited capitals across Europe and North America, carrying photos and testimonies from survivors. Gandhi's goal was to prove that what was unfolding wasn't internal politics, but it was a humanitarian catastrophe. In meetings with leaders like Nixon, Pompidou, and Heath, she demanded action against Pakistan's atrocities. Despite political resistance, her message stirred public opinion and won sympathy for India. International media, especially in the UK, highlighted the mass killings and refugee suffering. Gandhi's diplomacy laid the foundation for India's moral legitimacy in the coming war. India's call for justice and intervention. India's patience was running thin. Gandhi warned the world India couldn't shoulder the crisis alone. With 10 million refugees, security, economy, and national unity were at risk. Pakistan's refusal to seek a political solution left no option but intervention. India began mobilizing its armed forces, preparing for a decisive response. The Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, signed in August 1971, ensured diplomatic and military backing. India's intervention was framed not as a conquest but a moral and strategic necessity. The world stood at crossroads. India chose to act where others hesitated. Formation of Bangladesh and Mukti Bahini. On 26 March 1971, East Pakistan formally declared independence as Bangladesh following Operation Searchlight. A provisional government was established in exile based in Mujibnagar with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as symbolic leader. The Mukti Bahini or Liberation Army emerged as guerrilla force of ex-soldiers, students and volunteers. Led by Bengali defectors from the Pakistan's military, it included trained commandos and patriotic civilians. Their goal: liberate Bangladesh through armed resistance and rally international support. India recognized the provisional government and began extending logistical, medical, and military aid. The movement transformed into mass-based national struggle with support from millions of ordinary Bengalis. The Mukti Bahini became not just a military force but the soul of the new Bangladeshi nation. Guerrilla warfare and Indian support. Mukti Bahini fighters launched constant raids, ambushes, and sabotage missions across East Pakistan. They targeted power stations, railways, and bridges, crippling Pakistan's communication and supply lines. Pakistani forces responded with brutal reprisals, but insurgents regrouped and grew stronger. India covertly helped and provided training camps across the border in West Bengal, Tripura, and Assam. By mid 1971, nearly 30,000 Mukti Bahini fighters were actively operating with Indian support. Indian arms, radio communication gear, and field intelligence greatly enhanced their combat effectiveness. These guerrilla operations softened Pakistani defenses and created chaos in the enemy's rear areas. The Mukti Bahini made East Pakistan increasingly ungovernable for the Pakistani army. Indian intelligence and RAW's role. India's External Intelligence Agency, RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, played a critical role in 1971. RAW established and managed a vast network of training camps for Mukti Bahini fighters across Indian territory. They supplied arms, ammunitions, and helped design cross-border infiltration plans. RAW provided crucial battlefield intelligence, including Pakistani troop positions, supply routes, and weaknesses. The agency also intercepted enemy communication and fed valuable inputs to the Indian military. RAW helped broadcast Swadhin Bangla Betar Kendra, a pro-liberation radio station, to inspire Bengalis. The information warfare campaign built morale among the freedom fighters and discredited Pakistan globally. RAW's coordination with the Indian Army laid the foundation for synchronized military actions later. Coordinated operations with Mukti Bahini. By October 1971, Mukti Bahini fighters were operating in concert with India's Eastern Command. Over 8,000 trained Bengali guerrillas were divided into cells guided by Indian officers for tactical missions. The strategy was to isolate Pakistani strongholds and cut supply chains before full scale war. India provided artillery cover, air reconnaissance, and medevac for the key Mukti Bahini raids. In many sectors, joint teams captured villages and towns, preparing staging grounds for Indian forces. The Mitra Bahini, allied forces of India and Bangladesh, became a unified liberation force. By November, Mukti Bahini operated like a shadow army, laying groundwork for India's entry. Call for war becomes unavoidable. Despite months of restraint, India realized that diplomatic efforts had failed by late 1971. The refugee burden, border skirmishes, and Pakistan's internal collapse made war inevitable. On 3rd December 1971, Pakistan launched Operation Chengiz Khan, bombing Indian air bases. India now had the political, moral, and strategic justification to respond with full force. Indira Gandhi announced that India was at war, defending its sovereignty and Bengali humanity. The military was fully mobilized. General Sam Manekshaw had meticulously prepared for this moment. Thus began the Indo-Pak War of 1971, a just war born from necessity and duty. Pakistan launches Operation Chengiz Khan. On the evening of 3rd December 1971, Pakistan launched a surprise air attack named Operation Chengiz Khan. Pakistani aircraft bombed 11 Indian air bases, including Pathankot, Amritsar, Agra, and Srinagar. The operation mirrored Israel's 1967 air strategy but failed to achieve surprise or major damage. India's radar and early warning systems detected the incoming aircraft, minimizing losses. Runways were damaged in some locations, but India's air squadrons remained largely intact. The act of aggression gave India the moral and legal grounds to formally enter the war. Operation Chengiz Khan failed to cripple the IAF and became the trigger for full-scale Indo-Pakistani war. India officially enters the war. On 3rd December 1971, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi addressed the nation, declaring that India was at war. Pakistan's unprovoked attack provided the final justification for intervention in East Pakistan. India's response was swift and organized, backed by months of military preparation and political unity. The Indian Armed Forces launched coordinated operations on both eastern and western fronts. Gandhi emphasized India's objectives to defend its sovereignty and liberate Bangladesh from genocide. India immediately gained domestic and international support with the USSR backing its position. The Indian Parliament stood united across party lines, supporting the war as a moral and strategic necessity. General Manekshaw's strategic brilliance. General Sam Manekshaw, chief of the Indian Army, had carefully prepared for the war months in advance. He refused to rush into battle in March 1971, insisting on waiting until winter for optimal conditions. By December, India had mobilized 3 corps on the eastern front and defensive formations in the west. Manekshaw ensured that India's supply lines, logistics, and intelligence were flawless before war began. He personally briefed commanders, demanded total readiness, and boosted soldiers' morale. His strategic patience led to a 13-day victory, one of the shortest and most decisive wars in history. Manekshaw also used psychological warfare, broadcasting messages urging Pakistani troops to surrender with dignity. India's dual front war strategy. India pursued a two-theater war strategy, offensive in the east and defensive in the west. The Eastern Theater aimed to liberate Bangladesh rapidly through maneuver warfare and joint operations. In the West, India adopted a containment strategy, blunting Pakistani offensives while capturing some territory. Three Indian corps, 2, 4, and 33, advanced from the north, east, and west toward Dhaka. The Western Front saw major engagements in Punjab, Rajasthan, and Jammu, including battles at Longewala and Basantar. The dual strategy ensured that Pakistan could not shift troops between fronts or pressure India's borders. India's coordination of army, navy, and air force was seamless, proving the strength of integrated command. Eastern Theatre, India's blitz into East Pakistan. India's primary focus was East Pakistan, where Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora led the Eastern Command. On 4th December, Indian troops crossed into East Pakistan from multiple directions north, northeast, and west. The strategy avoided heavy fortresses aiming to bypass strongholds and captured key communication hubs. Cities like Jessore, Sylhet, and Brahmanbaria fell within the first 7 to 10 days. Air superiority, intelligence from RAW, and Mukti Bahini collaboration gave India a decisive edge. Pakistani Eastern Command under Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi became increasingly isolated and demoralized. Indian forces rapidly converged on Dhaka, cutting off retreat and supply routes from every direction. Mukti Bahini and Indian Army joint operations. By November 1971, Mukti Bahini forces were integrated into Indian Army's Eastern Command strategy. Nearly 8,000 trained Bengali guerrillas operated in small mobile units under Indian coordination. They provided real-time intelligence, disrupted enemy supply lines, and secured liberated zones. Mukti Bahini used local terrain knowledge to guide Indian columns through rivers and forests. Joint attacks on garrisons of Kushtia, Singh, and Chandpur weakened Pakistani morale. Indian artillery and air cover allowed guerrillas to strike deeper and faster than before. The Mitra Bahini, the combined Indo-Bangladesh force, emerged as a disciplined and effective liberation army. Fall of key towns Jessore, Sylhet, Brahmanbaria. Indian forces scored early victories by capturing key towns, clearing the path to Dhaka. Jessore fell on 7th December after intense urban combat and guerrilla support from Mukti Bahini. In the northeast, Sylhet was secured by Indian troops using helicopters to insert soldiers behind enemy lines. The city's fall disrupted Pakistan's access to Assam Burma sectors and weakened their northern flank. Brahmanbaria, a critical communication hub, was liberated by 8th December, cutting Pakistani supply chains. Pakistani forces began retreating or surrendering in clusters, suffering from poor coordination and collapsing morale. These swift victories, captures, proved India's maneuver warfare superiority and collapse of Pakistan's defensive grid. Paratroopers drop at Tangel, Dhaka encircled. On 11 December, India launched a bold paratrooper drop near Tangel, just 40 km north of Dhaka. Troops from the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment were dropped behind Pakistani lines to cut off escape. The operation, combined with Mukti Bahini intelligence, took the enemy by surprise. Rumors of a 5,000 man airdrop, deliberately exaggerated by India's PSYOPs, created panic in Dhaka. Tangel was a key river crossing. Its capture severed Pakistan's northern reinforcement routes. The paratroopers linked up with advancing 4th Corps units within 24 hours. Dhaka was now surrounded from all sides, and Pakistani troops began considering surrender. Meghna Heli Bridge Operation, Innovation in War. Indian 4 Corps under Lieutenant General Sagat Singh reached the Meghna River but found bridges destroyed. Instead of waiting, Indian forces created the Meghna Heli Bridge, airlifting troops across the river. Starting 9th December, IAF Mi-4 helicopters completed over 200 sorties in 48 hours. They ferried 600 plus troops, PT-76 amphibious tanks, and artillery under cover of darkness. Pakistani forces at Vairab Bazar were outflanked and abandoned their impregnable positions. The tactic bypassed Pakistani strongholds and brought Indian forces within 12 kilometers of Dhaka. The operation exemplified India's use of mobility, air power, and daring innovation in warfare. Civilian uprising and psychological warfare. As Indian troops advanced, civilians in East Pakistan rose up, attacking retreating Pakistani units. Towns and villages welcomed the Indian army with cheers, flowers, and cries of Joy Bangla. Radio broadcasts urged Pakistani troops to surrender and promised humane treatment under the Geneva Convention. General Manekshaw's direct radio messages to Pakistani commanders undermined their morale. Leaflets, loudspeakers, and Mukti Bahini networks spread word of India's victories. Pakistani troops, demoralized and encircled, faced hostility from locals and collapse of command. This psychological war broke Pakistan's will to fight and hastened their unconditional surrender. Western Theater Defensive Strategy Goals. While India's main offensive was in the east, the Western Front was strategically crucial. India's adopted a defensive posture here, aimed at containing Pakistan and preventing territorial losses. Pakistan believed that the defense of East Pakistan lies in the west, hoping to seize Indian land and bargain it. Indian formations in Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and Rajasthan were mobilized to repel invasions and counter attack when necessary. Major battles took place at Longewala, Basantar, Poonch, and Champ, with Indian forces successfully defending key sectors. In many areas, India also made tactical gains, capturing over 5,500 square kilometers of Pakistani territory. India's strategy succeeded. Pakistan's western advances were neutralized and its military was stretched on both fronts. Battle of Longewala 120 against 2000. On 5th December 1971, Pakistan launched a massive attack at Longewala in Rajasthan's third desert. Facing them were just 120 Indian soldiers from the Punjab Regiment, led by Major Kuldeep Singh Chandpuri. The Pakistani force included over 2,000 Indian soldiers and 45 tanks, mainly T-59 Chinese models. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Indian troops held their ground through the night. Armed with only jeep-mounted recoilless rifles, they stalled the advance using superior tactics and desert knowledge. The defenders used landmines, bottlenecked the tanks, and waited for dawn and air support. Their heroic stand saved the post and became one of the most inspiring defenses in Indian military history. Indian Air Force turns the tide at Longewala. At first light on 5th December, the Indian Air Force launched devastating strikes at Longewala. Hawker Hunter jets from the Jodhpur base bombed and starved Pakistani tanks and vehicles trapped in the sand. Over 36 tanks and dozens of vehicles were destroyed in precision air attacks throughout the day. Pakistani troops had no air cover and no anti aircraft defenses, making them easy targets. The air raids forced Pakistan's retreat, turning their offensive into a humiliating rout. Indian ground troops suffered minimal losses, while Pakistan lost men, armor, and morale. The Battle of Longewala showcased perfect army air coordination and is now a part of Indian military legend. Battle of Basantar, Tank Duels and Sacrifice. Battle of Basantar, fought from 15 to 17 December, was one of the fiercest tanks battles of the war. Indian forces crossed into Shakargarh sector, capturing enemy territory and halting Pakistan's advances. Pakistan responded with massive tank assaults, aiming to breach Indian lines and reclaim the initiative. Indian engineers braved enemy fire to build pontoon bridges, enabling tanks and artillery to cross the Basantar River. In intense fighting, Indian armor units destroyed over 48 Pakistani tanks, holding critical territory under fire. Pakistani losses were severe, and the sector was permanently neutralized as a threat. The battle proved Indian dominance in combined arms warfare and boosted the morale of Indian forces on the Western Front. Arun Khetrapal and Paramvir Chakra heroes. Second Lieutenant Arun Khetrapal, aged only 21, became a legend during the Battle of Basantar. His tank squadron faced a heavy Pakistani armored counterattack aimed at breaching Indian defenses. Despite his tank being hit, Khetrapal refused to abandon it and continued firing. He personally destroyed several enemy tanks, holding the line until he was fatally wounded. His bravery earned him posthumous Paramvir Chakra, India's highest wartime gallantry award. Other heroes included Major Hosiar Singh, Lance Naik Albert Ekka, and Flying Officer Nirmaljit Singh II, all recipients of the Paramvir Chakra. These soldiers exemplified unmatched courage, laying down their lives for India's sovereignty and honor. Pakistani strategy fails in the western sector. Pakistan's core military doctrine in 1971 was the defense of East Pakistan lies in the west. It hoped to capture Indian territory in Punjab and Kashmir to force a ceasefire and retain East Pakistan. Despite launching offensives in sectors like Chamb and Shakargarh, Pakistan achieved no major strategic gains. Indian forces countered every move and even pushed across the border in many areas. The failure at Longewala, defeats at Basantar, and loss of air superiority shattered Pakistan's offensive plan. India captured over 5,500 square kilometers in the west, while Pakistan gained only small patches of land. The Pakistani military was spread too thin and lost the initiative on both fronts, proving its doctrine fatally flawed. Indian offensiveness in Punjab and Kashmir. In Punjab and Jammu Kashmir sectors, India launched strategic counter offensives to relieve pressure and weaken Pakistan. The Shakargarh Bulge became the focal point of Indian advance, where fierce battles like Basantar took place. Indian infantry and armor crossed the border, capturing villages and key positions inside Pakistani territory. In Kashmir's Cham sector, Pakistan initially advanced, but Indian forces soon contained and pushed back. Indian engineers built bridges under fire, enabling rapid armor movement and flanking maneuvers. Indian units like the 47th Infantry Brigade and 45th Cavalry played decisive roles in pushing enemy lines back. By the war's end, India held large chunks of Pakistani territory in the west, neutralizing any bargaining leverage. Indian air superiority on both fronts. Within 3 days of war, the Indian Air Force achieved air superiority in both east and west. IAF fighters like MiG 21s, Sukhoi 7s, Nuts, and Hunters neutralized Pakistan's offensive capability. In the east, IAF enforced a no fly zone, isolating Dhaka from West Pakistan. Airstrikes destroyed runways at Tezgaon, Chittagong, and Jessore, grounding Pakistan's eastern air fleet. In the west, IAF bombed fuel depots, railheads, and air bases in Murid, Rafiki, and Shargodha. Indian pilots flew thousands of sorties, providing close air support, reconnaissance, and strategic bombing. IAF dominance gave Indian ground forces critical momentum and kept Pakistani forces on the defensive. Flying Officer Sekhon's dogfight over Srinagar. Flying Officer Nirmaljit Singh Sekhon was stationed at Srinagar airfield when Pakistan attacked on 14th December. As six Sabot jets raided the base, Sekhon took off in his Gnat fighter to intercept them. Despite being outnumbered, he engaged in a dogfight, shooting down two Sabers before being shot down. Shekhon's courage delayed the attack, giving Indian defenses time to respond and protect the airfield. He became the only IAF officer awarded the Paramveer Chakra, India's highest gallantry award. His sacrifice inspired generations of airmen and became a symbol of valor and duty. Shekhan's actions proved that even against overwhelming odds, Indian warriors upheld the honor of the skies. Pakistan's failed aerial and ground gambles. Pakistan's 1971 war plan depended on a quick knockout blow, especially through its air and armor strength. Operation Genghis Khan failed to disable Indian airfields, allowing the IAF to retaliate effectively. Pakistan's western offensives, including the Longewala, Shakargarh, and Chamb, were either blunted or reversed. The sinking of PNS Ghazi, destruction of Karachi port, and IAF strikes on fuel depots broke logistics. On the ground, Pakistani troops were overstretched, facing a better equipped and coordinated Indian military. With no air superiority, failed offensives, and collapsing morale, Pakistan's strategy crumbled by mid December. The dream of saving East Pakistan through Western successes had backfired catastrophically. Role of the Indian Navy in 1971. The Indian Navy played a decisive role in choking Pakistan's supply lines and crippling its maritime strength. As the war's onset, the Navy launched coordinated operations on both the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. It targeted Pakistan's main naval base at Karachi in the west and enforced a naval blockade in the east. The aircraft carrier INS Vikrant dominated the eastern coast, isolating East Pakistan completely. Naval commandos and the Mukti Bahini saboteurs conducted daring coastal raids and port sabotage missions. Pakistan's navy, split between the two wings, was rendered ineffective early in the war. India's naval success disrupted enemy logistics, demoralized Pakistani forces, and showcased sea power as a war winning factor. Operation Trident Attack on Karachi Port. On the night of 4 and 5th December 1971, the Indian Navy launched Operation Trident, striking Karachi with lethal precision. A task force of three Osa-class missile boats, INS Nipat, Nirghat, and Veer, escorted by two frigates, led the attack. They fired long-range Styx missiles, striking Karachi harbor and setting oil tanks ablaze. Pakistani destroyers PNS Khyber and PNS Muhafiz were sunk. Another ship was heavily damaged. Massive explosions lit up the sky as Karachi burned through the night. India suffered no casualties, marking a historic victory and the Navy's first successful missile operation. 4th December is now celebrated as Navy Day in India to honor this brilliant naval strike. INS Nipat, Nirghat, Veer, the killer squadron. The three missile boats of Operation Trident, INS Nipat, INS Nirghat, and INS Veer, earned the nicknames Killer Squadron. INS Nirghat sunk the Pakistani destroyer PNS Khyber using a single Strix missile. INS Veer destroyed PNS Muhafiz, a minesweeper guarding Karachi's approach, with accurate fire missile. INS Nipat fired on the oil storage tanks and transport vessels inside Karachi harbor, causing massive fires. Their long-range missile systems allowed precise attacks without risking close engagement. The operation demonstrated India's mastery of missile warfare and tactical sea maneuvering. The killer squadron returned unharmed, having written naval warfare history in the Indian Ocean. Operation Python, Karachi set ablaze again. On 8 to 9th December, India launched Operation Python, a follow-up strike to deepen damage to Karachi port. INS Vinash, another missile boat, along with its support ships, attacked under cover of darkness. Indian missiles struck merchant vessels and the Karachi oil terminal, reigniting fires from the earlier attack. A Liberian registered ship carrying oil for Pakistan was sunk in the process, further crippling fuel supply. Karachi's port operations came to a complete halt, severely affecting Pakistan's logistics. The attacks proved that Indian naval supremacy was now unchallenged in the Western theater. Operation Python confirmed the success of small missile boats as potent strategic strike platforms. Strategic naval blockade of the West Pakistan. Alongside its attacks, India enforced a naval blockade that paralyzed Pakistan's maritime trade. Pakistani commercial shipping was halted. No vessels could safely enter or leave Karachi or Gadar. The blockade choked Pakistan's oil supplies, ammunition imports, and troop movements by sea. Indian naval surveillance prevented smuggling routes from the Gulf and neutralized Pakistan's resupply options. The fear of Indian missile boats kept the Pakistan fleet confined to its ports for the remainder of the war. The Navy's dominance effectively severed West Pakistan's access to global trade and military support. It was a textbook example of how sea power can shape the outcome of a land war. INS Vikrant and Eastern Naval Operations. INS Vikrant, India's only aircraft carrier at the time, spearheaded naval operations in the Bay of Bengal. Deployed well before the war began, it ensured complete naval supremacy over East Pakistan. Its air wing included Seahawk fighters and Alice aircraft capable of bombing and reconnaissance. Once war broke out, Vikrant squadrons launched repeated strikes on key coastal cities and ports. Its presence enabled a tight naval blockade, cutting off all escape and supply routes to East Pakistan. Pakistani naval assets in the east were either destroyed or forced into hiding. Vikrant's success proved decisive. East Pakistan was completely isolated by sea, dooming Pakistani forces in Dhaka. Carrier strikes on Chittagong Cox's Bazar. Starting 4th December, aircraft from INS Vikrant bombed major targets in East Pakistan. Chittagong, Cox's Bazar, Khulna, and Mongla came under repeated aerial bombardment. Ports, oil depots, and airstrips were destroyed, grounding the Pakistan Air Force in the east. The strikes crippled supply lines and disabled Pakistani naval operations permanently. Docked merchant ships and patrol vessels were sunk, blocking sea-borne reinforcement or evacuation. Indian pilots flew with precision, ensuring minimum collateral damage and maximum strategic effect. These carrier-based attacks effectively paralyzed East Pakistan's logistical backbone within days of war start. Mukti Bahini naval sabotage Operation Jackpot. In August 1971, Mukti Bahini launched Operation Jackpot, a coordinated sabotage of Pakistani river ports. With Indian Navy training and support, Mukti commandos targeted ships in Chittagong, Mongla, and Narayanganj. Explosives were planted underwater, sinking or disabling over 40 Pakistani and foreign merchant vessels. The attacks disrupted riverine transport, which was a vital point in the East Pakistan's deltaic terrain. These pre-war strikes demonstrated the resolve and capability of Mukti Bahini Navy. Operation Jackpot was timed with public broadcasts and posters, raising Bengali morale. It laid the foundation for joint riverine warfare, later crucial in India's full-scale offensive. Sinking of PNS Ghazi, victory beneath the sea. Pakistan's most feared submarine, PNS Ghazi, was deployed to destroy INS Vikrant in the Bay of Bengal. Indian naval intelligence tricked Ghazi into believing Vikrant was docked at Vishakhapatnam. On 3rd and 4th December, Indian destroyer INS Rajput detected and depth-charged Ghazi off Vizag coast. A massive explosion followed. PNS Ghazi sank with all 92 crew members on board. The cause remains debated, but Ghazi's sinking eliminated Pakistan's biggest naval threat in the east. India recovered war materials, maps, and codes from the wreck, confirming its mission. The loss demoralized Pakistani Navy and gave Vikrant free rein in the Bay of Bengal. Naval coordination and maritime superiority. The Indian Navy, Air Force, and Mukti Bahini operated in seamless coordination throughout the war. INS Vikrant's carrier group blocked sea access, while missile boats like INS Veer struck from the west. Naval commandos and Mukti Bahini fighters attacked ports and patrol craft inland. India enforced simultaneous blockades in both Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. Pakistan's naval forces were either sunk, trapped in ports, or rendered ineffective. Indian intelligence ensured submarine threats were neutralized and key ports were continuously surveilled. The result: unquestioned Indian maritime dominance, critical to isolating East Pakistan and ensuring a swift victory. Cold War context: US, USSR, and China. The 1971 war unfolded amid Cold War tensions, drawing global superpowers into South Asia's conflict. Pakistan was aligned with United States and China, both seeking influence in the region. India, under Indira Gandhi, leaned toward the Soviet Union, which backed its strategic interest. The US valued Pakistan as a bridge to China, which facilitated Nixon's secret diplomacy with Beijing. China supported Pakistan rhetorically but remained cautious, avoiding military involvement. The USSR saw India as a counterweight to US backed Pakistan and China's growing influence. The superpower rivalry played out through vetoes, arms deals, and naval deployments, but India remained tactically focused and diplomatically prepared. Nixon, Kissinger, and the pro Pakistan tilt. President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger staunchly backed Pakistan during the 1971 crisis. They viewed General Yahya Khan as a critical ally for opening diplomatic ties with China. Despite knowing about atrocities in East Pakistan, The US administration dismissed them as internal matters. The blood telegram from US Consul Archer Blood condemned Pakistan's genocide and criticized American silence. Nixon ignored these reports, continuing arms shipments and intelligence support to Pakistan. The White House publicly urged restraint but privately encouraged Pakistan's hard-line stance. This blind loyalty damaged US credibility and strengthened India-US relations for decades. Indira Gandhi's World Diplomacy Tour. Between October and November 1971, Indira Gandhi visited multiple capitals to expose Pakistan's brutality. She traveled to London, Paris, Bonn, Ottawa, and Washington, D.C., meeting top global leaders. Armed with refugee data and images of genocide, she presented India's moral case for intervention. In Washington, she clashed with Nixon, who tried to downplay the crisis. Despite limited US support, her efforts swayed European and public opinion in India's favor. Gandhi's campaign helped frame the war as a humanitarian mission, not territorial aggression. Her diplomacy bolstered India's international standing and softened Western resistance to India's coming actions. Soviet-Indian Friendship Treaty of 1971. On 9th August 1971, India and the USSR signed a 20-year treaty of peace, friendship, and cooperation. The treaty guaranteed mutual support in case of external aggression or conflict escalation. It gave India strategic depth, discouraging China from acting and countering US naval pressure. The USSR pledged political backing and extended military and intelligence support to India. In the UN, the Soviets vetoed three ceasefire resolutions in December, buying India time for victory. Moscow also shadowed US naval movements in the Indian Ocean, neutralizing threats to Indian operations. This treaty was a geopolitical masterstroke, securing India's flank and shifting the balance in South Asia. US deploys the 7th Fleet, USS Enterprise. As India neared victory, the US dispatched Task Force 74, led by USS Enterprise, into the Bay of Bengal. The move aimed to intimidate India and potentially evacuate Pakistani troops from East Pakistan. The Enterprise, a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, symbolized Cold War brinkmanship. India stood firm, backed by Soviet assurances and the positioning of Soviet submarines and cruisers nearby. The Soviet Navy shadowed the US fleet, triggering a tense standoff without direct conflict. Ultimately, the USS Enterprise never engaged, and the mission failed to alter the war's outcome. This episode confirmed India's resolve and diplomatic maturity in navigating Cold War superpower politics. Soviet naval response in the Indian Ocean. In response to US 7th Fleet deployment led by the USS Enterprise, the Soviet Union acted swiftly. The Soviets dispatched submarines, cruisers, and destroyers from their Pacific Fleet to shadow the US task force. These included nuclear powered submarines with orders to deter any intervention against India. The Soviet naval flotilla maintained a silent but effective watch in the Indian Ocean, countering US pressure. Their presence reassured India's leadership and confirmed the strength of the Indo Soviet alliance. This naval standoff remained cold, but its strategic implications were profound. It prevented escalation. The Soviet Navy's response showed India was not alone. The superpowers' backing allowed India to act decisively in East Pakistan without fear of external interference. It marked one of the few Cold War era standoffs in South Asia, ending entirely in India's favor. China's calculated silence and inaction. Despite its alliance with Pakistan, China chose not to intervene in the 1971 war. While Beijing issued warnings and voiced rhetorical support, it refrained from direct military action. India's preemptive diplomacy, including the Indo Soviet Treaty, made Chinese intervention risky and unlikely. The Himalayan passes were snowbound, ruling out ground movement into India's north. Internally, China was recovering from the Cultural Revolution and avoided provoking the USSR. India had mobilized forces along the northern borders, anticipating any possibility of Chinese involvement. Ultimately, China's presence proved strategic. It preserved its long term interests without risking conflict. This inaction dealt a blow to Pakistan's hopes for a two front pressure on India and confirmed India's growing regional deterrent credibility. UN resolutions and Soviet vetoes. As the war escalated, the United States pushed ceasefire resolutions in the UN Security Council. The US led resolutions demanded India's halt its offensive and withdraw from East Pakistan. India rejected the proposals, citing ongoing genocide in a just cause for intervention. The Soviet Union vetoed three UN resolutions on December 4th, 5th, and 13th, effectively shielding India from international pressure. These vetoes brought India crucial time to achieve its military objectives and liberate Bangladesh. The General Assembly passed a non-binding resolution for a ceasefire, but India continued its campaign. The Soviet diplomatic shield ensured India was not diplomatically isolated, even as Western powers tried to stall its momentum. This was a rare movement when UN power politics directly shaped battlefield outcomes in South Asia. Global media and moral outrage. International journalists and humanitarian groups exposed Pakistan's atrocities to the world. The June 1971 article Genocide by Anthony Mascarenhas, a Pakistani journalist, appeared in the Sunday Times UK, confirming mass killings. The reports of mass rape, executions, and refugee testimonials flooded global headlines, fueling moral outrage. Footage of refugee camps, mass graves, and mutilated bodies stirred protests across Europe and North America. Western public opinion began to sympathize with India's position even as governments remained cautious. The blood telegram from US consul in Dhaka called America's silence a moral bankruptcy. Despite Nixon's resistance, public pressure and global awareness delegitimized Pakistan's narrative and bolstered India's standing as a liberator. India's diplomatic victory in the global arena. By the war's end, India emerged not just a militarily triumphant but diplomatically vindicted. Indira Gandhi's assertive diplomacy had framed the conflict as a fight for humanity and justice. With Soviet backing, Indian forces had maneuvered through Cold War risks with skill and precision. Most global powers, including France, the UK, and the non aligned movement, acknowledged Bangladesh's plight. India's decision to recognize Bangladesh on 6 December before most of the world further cemented its moral leadership. While the US had tried to brand India as an aggressor, its support for genocidal regime isolated it diplomatically. India's ability to stand firm in the face of superpower pressure redefined its global identity. The 1971 war was not just about territorial realignment, but it was India's coming of age movement as a regional and moral power. Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, architect of victory. General Sam Hormuzji Faramji Jamsetji Manekshaw, later Field Marshal, was the chief strategist of India's 1971 triumph. Charismatic and fearless, he combined strategic foresight with tactical brilliance and troop level moral building. Manekshaw refused to launch war prematurely in March 1971, insisting India must be militarily and logistically ready. His calm confidence inspired the armed forces. He famously told Indira Gandhi, "I guarantee you victory." Under his leadership, Indian troops were well deployed, battle prepared, and psychologically primed. He oversaw a multi theater operation seamlessly coordinating Army, Navy, and Air Force efforts. His command led to a decisive 13-day victory, the fastest and most complete in India's modern history. Manekshaw's warnings and planning. In April 1971, when Indira Gandhi asked about military invention, Manekshaw boldly said no, not yet. He warned that premature action could risk defeat due to floods, unpreparedness troops, and Chinese threat. Instead, he demanded the time for troop mobilization, equipment allocation, and proper strategic staging. By December, he had positioned 3 corps in the east, established intelligence coordination, and secured Himalayan borders. Manekshaw emphasized minimal civilian casualties, rapid movement, and psychological tactics to pressure enemy surrender. He's broadcasted surrender messages to Pakistani troops promising humane treatment under the Geneva Convention. His preparation ensured victory with minimum Indian casualties and international credibility intact. Indira Gandhi, political courage and resolve. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi showed unwavering political resolve during the 1971 crisis. Despite global pressure, she chose morality over appeasement, standing against Pakistan's genocide. Her government sheltered 10 million refugees and exposed atrocities to the world through diplomatic channels. Gandhi united India politically, winning support across parties for intervention in East Pakistan. She was unshaken, even as US deployed the Seventh Fleet, trusting the Indo-Soviet Pact. Her speeches emphasized not war, but justice and human rights, earning global admiration. Indira Gandhi's bold leadership helped India emerge victorious on both the battlefield and the diplomatic table. Her role in shaping national unity. Indira Gandhi's leadership turned a humanitarian crisis into a moment of national unity and purpose. She visited refugee camps, addressed the Indian parliament, and met with soldiers to boost morale. Gandhi resisted domestic pressures for early war, trusting Sam Manekshaw's timing and strategy. Her framing of the war as a fight for the oppressed Bengalis won international support. The Durga image emerged after India's triumph, symbolizing her as a warrior for justice. She handled international diplomacy, military decisions, and national messaging with rare coherence. Her leadership in 1971 defined her political legacy and gave India a unified and assertive identity. Heroes of the war: Hosiar Singh, Ikka Mullah. Major Hosiar Singh, Paramveer Chakra, led a bayonet charge in Basantar, capturing enemy bunkers under intense fire. Lance Naik Albert Ekka, Paramveer Chakra, fought in Ganga Sagar, silencing multiple machine gun nests before being martyred. Captain M.N. Mullah chose to go down with INS Kukri after it was torpedoed, saving his crew. Their sacrifices represent the valor, discipline, and duty of India's armed forces during 1971. Countless others in air, land, and sea units fought with distinction in fierce combat zones. India's Paramveer Chakra awards in this war immortalized selfless bravery. Their, these heroes are remembered not just for their courage but for upholding India's moral stand in a just war. Naval, air, and infantry coordination. India's three service branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force, worked in unprecedented coordination during the 1971 war. Naval units ensured blockades and missile strikes in both the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, crippling Pakistan supply chains. The Indian Air Force achieved air superiority within 72 hours, bombing key air bases, bridges, and fuel depots. Army units advanced in triangular formation towards Dhaka, aided by air reconnaissance and artillery cover. The heli lift operations, like the Meghna Bridge, demonstrated seamless joint force logistics under fire. Intelligence from RAW and cooperation with the Mukti Bahini allowed real time battlefield adjustments. The synergy between the services transformed India's military into a unified war machine, delivering swift and decisive victory. Mukti Bahini, the People's Liberation Army. The Mukti Bahini emerged as the heart of Bangladeshi resistance, born out of oppression and fueled by patriotism. Comprising Bengali defectors, students, farmers, and professionals, it became a formidable guerrilla army. With Indian training and arms, it grew to over 30,000 fighters by mid 1971, expanding to nearly 1 lakh by the war's end. They conducted raids, sabotage, and intelligence missions that weakened Pakistan's grip across East Pakistan. The Mukti Bahini operated in both irregular guerrilla warfare and conventional roles, fighting side by side with Indian forces. Their resolve transformed the war into a people's liberation movement, not just a military campaign. The Mukti Bahini is honored in Bangladesh as freedom fighters, Mukti Jodhas, who shaped the nation's birth. Role of Bengali youth and defectors. Bengali youth, student workers, and farmers rushed to join the Mukti Bahini in record numbers. Many crossed into India for training and returned to wage a guerrilla war in their homeland. Defectors from the Pakistan Army, Navy, and Air Force added military expertise to the resistance. Young men and women formed intelligence units, sabotage squads, and medical teams to support combatants. Universities became recruitment hubs. The educated elite fought beside rural volunteers. The defection of Bengali officers, such as Colonel M.A.G. Osmani, gave the movement leadership and discipline. Their sacrifice laid the foundation for Bangladesh's future army, with roots in the people's struggle. Joint victories with Indian Army. The Indian Army and Mukti Bahini achieved crucial victories by operating as one united force, the Mitra Bahini. In areas like Kushtia, Tangel, and Brahmanbaria, joint operations overrun entrenched Pakistani positions. Mukti Bahini guerrillas cut enemy supply lines while Indian forces delivered knockout punches. Locals offered intelligence, food, and shelter, turning civilians into force multipliers. In the Meghna and Sylhet sectors, Mukti Bahini cleared paths for Indian armor and infantry to advance. These joint campaigns ensured minimum resistance, rapid victories, and fewer civilian casualties. The liberation of towns ahead of India's arrival showed the power of people and soldiers united. Public uprising and emotional bonding. As Indian troops advanced, ordinary Bangladeshis rose in open defiance, attacking retreating Pakistani units. Villagers blocked roads, burned Pakistani supply trucks, and welcomed Indian soldiers with flowers and arti. Emotional scenes unfolded as families hugged Indian troops, chanting Joy Bangla and Joy Hind. The people saw Indian soldiers as liberators, not invaders, leading to trust and cooperation. In cities like Jessore and Dhaka, Indian flags flew alongside the green and red flag of Bangladesh. Mukti Bahini fighters were often reunited with families during liberation drives, deepening the emotional impact. This grassroots uprising turned the war into a shared moral cause, binding India and Bangladesh through blood, struggle, and freedom. Pakistani collapse and Dhaka encircled. By 15 December 1971, Pakistani defenses in East Pakistan had crumbled under relentless Indian and Mukti Bahini pressure. Major towns had fallen: Jessore, Khulna, Sylhet, Comilla, and Tangel, leaving Dhaka completely encircled. Pakistani forces under Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi were pushed into a shrinking perimeter with collapsing supply lines. India controlled airspace, rivers, and roads. No reinforcements or escape were possible from the west. Artillery pounded the capital, and airstrikes hit Dhaka's governor's house, prompting civilian leadership to resign. Pakistani morale was shattered. Many soldiers deserted or awaited surrender to avoid further bloodshed. With defeat imminent, General Niazi began seeking terms, realizing further resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties and humiliation. The Ramna Racecourse surrender, 93,000 prisoner of war. On 16 December 1971, Pakistan's Eastern Command surrendered unconditionally to India and Mukti Bahini. The ceremony took place at Ramna Racecourse in Dhaka, with General Niazi handing over his pistol to General Jagjit Singh Arora. The instrument of surrender marked the capitulation of 93,000 Pakistani troops, the largest surrender since World War II. The surrender included Army, Navy, Air Force personnel, paramilitaries, and collaborators. Indian and Bangladeshi forces stood victorious. Flags were hoisted as new nation emerged. The event was broadcast globally, with Niazi's signature sealing the birth of Bangladesh. India's promise of humane treatment was kept. POWs were protected under the Geneva Convention protocols. General Arora and dignity in victory. Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, commanding India's Eastern Command, led the liberation campaign with exceptional precision. At the surrender ceremony, Arora maintained dignity and humility, embracing Niazi without vengeance or triumphalism. His conduct ensured that the surrender was honorable, avoiding humiliation and bloodshed. Arora made sure the POWs were treated with respect, securing India's reputation as a civilized victor. His swift, coordinated advance across East Pakistan minimized collateral damage and protected civilians. As the face of India's victory in the East, Arora remains a respected symbol of disciplined military leadership. He demonstrated that moral conduct in war enhances strategic outcomes and international respect. Joy in Bangladesh. Flags, songs, freedom. On 16 December, Bangladesh erupted in tears, songs, and joy as freedom was finally achieved. Citizens poured into streets waving the green and red flag of Bangladesh alongside Indian tricolors. Joy Bangla, Joy Hind echoed across Dhaka as soldiers and civilians celebrated side by side. The Mukti Bahini was held as People's Army, many reunited with families after long separations. Indian soldiers were welcomed with aarti, garlands, and gifts, seen not as invaders but liberators. Cultural icons sang patriotic songs, mosques and temples held special prayers for martyrs. It was more than a military victory, it was a civilizational triumph over oppression forged in shared struggle and brotherhood. Shimla Agreement and return of POWs. In July 1972, Indira Gandhi and Pakistan leadership signed the Simla Agreement, laying post war diplomatic foundations. India agreed to return over 90,000 POWs in exchange for Pakistan's recognition of Bangladesh and a commitment to peaceful resolution. Territorial adjustments followed. India returned most Western gains while retaining strategic positions in Kashmir. The agreement emphasized bilateral dialogue, laying the groundwork for future Indo-Pak talks. India honored its word, releasing prisoners without abuse, setting an international example in post war conduct. Though fragile, Shimla was a step toward regional stability after the trauma of 1971. The war ended not with occupation, but with diplomacy, restraint, and a vision for peace, a hallmark of India's civilizational ethos. Birth of Bangladesh, global recognition. On 16 December 1971, the world witnessed the birth of a new nation, Bangladesh. India was the first country to officially recognize Bangladesh, doing so on 6th December 1971, even before the war concluded. Soon after the surrender, countries across Asia, Europe, and Africa extended recognition. The Soviet Union, France, and UK acknowledged Bangladesh, while the US delayed recognition until April 1972. Bangladesh joined the United Nations in 1974, formalizing its global status. With Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as the Prime Minister, Bangladesh began its journey toward democracy and reconstruction. The new nation was forged from sacrifice with the blood of millions of Bengalis and valor of Indian soldiers. Its birth reshaped South Asia's political geography and remains one of the most just and humanly owned struggles in modern history. Pakistan's political collapse and Bhutto's rise. Defeated, humiliated, and divided, Pakistan faced political chaos in the war's aftermath. Military dictator General Yahya Khan resigned on 20th December 1971, handing power to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Bhutto returned from the UN to find a nation in mourning, its army discredited, and public trust shattered. West Pakistan experienced protests, military purges, and soul searching over its treatment of the Bengalis. Bhutto declared, "We have been humiliated in the dust," acknowledging the gravity of the loss. Pakistan's national narrative struggled to accept the genocide or military failure, often blaming India and conspiracies. Despite the defeat, Bhutto's leadership helped initiate the Shimla Agreement, aiming to reset Indo-Pak ties. Pakistan would take decades to politically and militarily recover from the loss of half of its population and territory. Trials, apologies, and memory of atrocities. After the war, Bangladesh demanded justice for the genocide committed by the Pakistan army. The new government arrested collaborators, Razakars, and began trial for war crimes. Pakistan refused to try its generals and rejected the term genocide, further straining relations. The Hamudur Rahman Commission report, Pakistan's internal inquiry, admitted mass killings and rapes but was kept secret until 2000. Only in 2002 did General Niazi, the surrendering commander, issue a muted apology. Bangladesh observes Martyred Intellectuals Day, 14 December, and Victory Day, 16 December, each year in remembrance. India remembers Vijay Divas, honoring its soldiers and moral cause they defended. The atrocities remain a scar on regional memory, a warning against silence, and call for accountability. India's rise as a regional power. In 1971, the war marked India's coming of age as a decisive, confident regional superpower. It demonstrated strategic maturity, military coordination, and effective diplomacy under global scrutiny. India defeated a US backed Pakistan, neutralized Chinese threats, and earned Soviet trust, reshaping global perceptions. The world saw India not just as a civilizational giant, but as a modern state capable of hard power. India's 13-day war showcased its ability to plan, execute, and conclude a campaign with moral legitimacy. The war also strengthened India's global voice in humanitarian discourse and post colonial leadership. The unity displayed by Indian citizens and politicians remains a model of national coherence during crisis. From 1971 onward, India's foreign and defense policies reflected a bold, self assured tone backed by proven capability. Legacy of the war: Jai Hind, Joy Bangla. The Indo-Pak War of 1971 left behind a legacy of freedom, sacrifice, and solidarity. India fought not for conquest, but for the liberation of a people subjected to genocide and tyranny. The war united two nations and two cultures, India and Bangladesh, through shared blood and ideals. Slogans like Joy Hind and Joy Bangla became the rallying cries of victory, echoed for generations. India's ethical conduct, respect for POWs, swift withdrawal, and diplomatic closure won global admiration. The heroism of Indian soldiers, the resistance of Mukti Bahini, and the tears of a liberated people remain etched in South Asian memory. The war reminds us that justice, when backed by courage and clarity, can reshape history. More than a military victory, 1971 was a triumph of the human spirit over oppression. This was not just a military triumph, it was a moral victory for all of humanity. The Indo Pak War of 1971 stands tall in history as a shining example of compassion in action and decisive leadership. India didn't just win a war, it liberated a nation, gave dignity to millions, and sent a message that genocide cannot be ignored. As we remember our brave soldiers, the resilience of the Mukti Bahini, and tears of joy in Dhaka, let us never forget the cost of freedom. This story must be told not just as Indians, but as global citizens who believe in justice. On every Vijay Divas, we salute the heroes of 1971. Jai Hind, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Until next time, keep exploring the pages of history with RIG History Extended. Thank you.